Welcome back, everyone. This is part 4 of our multiple part series on how to write a simple story. Please subscribe, like, and comment below. Hit the notification bell to know when I release new content. In the previous video, we created the foundation for our villain. We explored who he is, what drives him, and the role he might play in the larger story. Now it is time to see how those ideas hold up on the page. The chapter you are about to hear is not meant to lock the story into place. It is an early attempt to discover Drathic through action, atmosphere, and dialogue. Some details will survive into later versions, while others may change completely as the story develops. That uncertainty is part of the process. A plan gives you direction, but a draft reveals the story. You often cannot know whether a character works until you place them in a scene and let them speak. This chapter marks our first real encounter with Drathic, and offers an early glimpse of the threat he may become. For more help with developing your first novel, take a look at my previous videos in this series. Now let's begin. Dark clouds lay heavy over an hour, yet no rain fell from them, and beneath that still and sorrowful sky, the town stood as it had been, and as grief had kept it, fair in shape and dreadful in silence. The northern road wound before the small boy's feet, and he knew every stone of it, though in the dream it lengthened as he walked, as roads will do when the heart is eager and the world is cruel. There was the mill beside the river, turning though no water stirred below it. There were the bright pennants above the empty stalls, the crooked oak near the chapel, and the ditch where once a wooden sword had been lost in play with the baron's youngest son. All was known to him, and all was changed, as if memory had clothed the dead in the garments of the living. At the western gate his father stood in the gray and blue of the garrison, one hand upon his sword. He had been a soldier of the baron's house, strong once, and tall in the eyes of his son, yet sickness had already laid claim upon him. His cheeks were hollow, his brow wet with cold sweat, and each breath came from him with the rasp of dry leaves. The child ran to him and called out, but no sound passed his lips. His father knelt and set a fading hand upon the boy's shoulder, and there was tenderness in his face, and weariness also, as of a man who had long delayed farewell. "You should not be here," said his father. The boy reached for him, but before his fingers found that beloved hand, the soldier broke apart in ash, and in wind bore him away, though neither branch nor grass was stirred. Then the road was gone, and the child sat within the great hall of House Delvebrow, near the hearth where the flames once burned high beneath dark rafters. The tables were filled with meat and bread and cups of red wine. Servants passed between laughing guests, and Baron Arlen sat among his children, not above them. Near the fire the boy's mother held her harp. She wore deep green, and in her hair was bound the silver cord Duchess Maeve had given her at winter feast. Her fingers moved upon the strings, and her song rose clear and gentle, so that even the guards by the doors turned their heads to listen. After sickness had taken her husband, Baron Arlen had given mother and son shelter, and Duchess Maeve had found a place for the widow among the household musicians. The children of House Delvebrow had drawn the lonely boy into their games beneath tables, behind curtains, and through the gardens beyond the hall. They were not his kin by blood or station, but kindness has roots of its own, and in time he had loved them as one loves those who make a place in the world less cold. His mother smiled at him across the harp, and then the fire dimmed, the long tables emptied, the faces of the guests withdrew into shadow, blood glistened on strings beneath her fingers, yet still she sang. From the northern hills came a deep horn, another answered in the east, a third sounded so near that the cups trembled upon the table, and the child knew, though no voice had named them, that the Visuvici had come. It was raiding season. They had crossed the border in numbers not seen for a generation. From the barren highlands they descended, wearing hides over rusted mail, their faces blackened with soot gathered from houses already burned. Some came for cattle, some for grain, some for soil and water, and some for no purpose but the old hunger of men who have made slaughter their custom. The king had promised aid. Each year sealed letters had come, bearing his pledge that soldiers from the neighboring nobles would stand beside an hour before the frost. The people had watched the southern road for banners and the crowned stag upon the shields, but none came. No horse crossed the bridge, no line of spears appeared beneath the royal sign, no messenger rode to speak the shame aloud. The boy stood then in the marketplace, though he knew not how he came there. Smoke dragged itself through the streets, and the watch bell struck wildly without rhythm. Men fought by the palisade until their weapons broke, or they vanished beneath the press. Women fled toward the river with children in their arms. Upon the steps of House Delvebrow, Baron Arlen fell with a spear through his side. Duchess Maeve was drawn screaming into the yard, and 2 of her children clung to her gown. Above them all the king's proud standard hung untouched, as if the beast embroidered there looked down and would not see. Then the boy was in his mother's house. Smoke filled the room. Heavy feet struck the road outside. Somewhere near a woman screamed until the cry became a choking sound and ceased. His mother tore aside a rug beside the hearth and lifted the narrow hatch hidden in the floor. "Get inside," she said. He clung to her arm, but terror had given her strength, and she seized him by the shoulders and forced him down into the dark. "Whatever you hear, be silent. Do not come out until I return." He shook his head, but no words came. She kissed his brow, lowered him into the hollow beneath the boards, and shut the panel above him. Darkness closed over the last sight of her face. The door burst inward, wood splintered, cupboards were torn open. Harsh voices moved through the room, quick with cruelty and triumph. His mother cried out from the far side of the house, drawing them from the place where her son lay hidden, and then she ran into the street. The raiders followed, laughing as they went. Beneath the floor, the boy pressed both hands over his mouth and listened. He did not breathe. He did not move. He waited through long hours, longer than any years he had yet lived, but the hatch did not open, and his mother did not return. Drathig awoke beneath a canopy of rotting cloth, his hands drenched in the coverlet as if they still held back the breath of a frightened child. For a while he lay motionless, while the cries of an hour lingered in the chamber, fading one by one, until only the memory of the harp remained. Near the window a lantern burned with an emerald flame, and its sickly light caught the gold flecks in his green eyes. The rest of his face lay in shadow. He had the narrow countenance of one time had touched unwillingly, severe and pale, and thin lines run beneath his eyes like cracks in old stone. Black hair fell loose about his shoulders as he rose. Damp had claimed the chamber. Tapestries sagged from their hooks. Carved chairs bent in warped shapes. Pale mold spread over the ceiling like roots seeking a grave. Drathig crossed to a shallow basin and plunged his hands into the fetid water. He washed his face, though cleanliness belonged to those who still believed that decline could be resisted by care. A knock sounded at the door. Before he answered, a small woman entered, clothed in black robe stitched with faint green thread. The thread pulsed beneath the cloth like poisoned veins. She kept her eyes lowered and stopped just within the threshold. "Your Eminence," she said, "a visitor has come. She awaits below in the main hall." Drathig did not turn. He lifted one hand, and that slight motion dismissed her. The woman bowed and backed away, then fled down the corridor with steps too swift to hide her fear. He dressed without aid. Layered black robes fell upon him, marked at the hems with symbols sewn in dull green. Around his neck he fastened a small iron crown with broken points, then drew a deep hood over his head. Last he took up a staff, fashioned from the charred limb of a tree cut from an hour after its fall. At its crown sat a polished onyx held in iron claws, and the stone swallowed light rather than gave it back. When his fingers closed around the burned wood, a murmur passed through the walls. The fortress knew its master. Down he went through narrow passages cut deep into the mountain. Candles burned in alcoves before faceless saints. Bones lined the corridors, the relics of those who had opposed the order and whose names had been taken from them. Priests pressed themselves against stone as he passed. Some bowed low, some whispered charms, though all their charms had been taught by the power they feared. At last he came into the great hall beneath the mountain, where pillars rose into smoke and darkness. Between them stood statues of old monarchs and bishops, each face cracked, each inscription hacked away. Pale roots wound through their eyes and mouths. Beneath those voiceless sovereigns and prelates weighed the sick, the banished, the condemned, and the desperate. They had come for cures, for vengeance, for forbidden knowledge, or for a lord honest enough to confess their mercy did not rule the world. A herald stepped before the throne. He wore red robes stained with soot and ash, and about his waist hung a chain made from the shackles of those who had surrendered themselves to the order. He lifted both arms, and when the whispers ceased, his voice rang beneath the unseen roof. "Kneel before Drathig the Wise, herald of all things dying, saint of ruin, keeper of the withered crown. Set those who fear death flee from his shadow, and let those who would surrender flesh, will, and soul come forth to receive his power and majesty." The faithful sank to their knees, and before the herald could speak again, Drathig raised his hand. "Clear the hall." His voice was not loud, yet it moved among the pillars and returned from the darkness above, deepened by the mountain itself. The herald bowed and obeyed. Attendants opened the side passages. The gathered supplicants withdrew through bitter smoke, leaving behind the scrape of sandals, the clink of chains, and the last mutters of prayer. Soon only one figure stood at the center of the hall. She wore a pale gray gown beneath a traveling cloak, yet neither mud nor ash marked her hem, though the road to that place crossed marsh and barren stone. Against the surrounding decay she seemed almost bright, like a white flower rooted in a burial mound. Drathic climbed through steps and seated himself upon the throne, a seat carved from a single block of dark rock and crowned with the skull of a beast long vanished from this very mountain. He set his staff beside him and studied the visitor from beneath his hood. "Report." The woman inclined her head. An approach had been prepared, my liege, yet the target is hard to divide from watching eyes. Her voice was quiet and pleasing, with the closeness of a secret spoken at one's ear. "Then you seek more coin," Drathic said, "or perhaps another resurrection tome." She lifted her face enough for the curve of her mouth to show. "I seek nothing beyond the grand bargain we made. I may require only a few of your less fortunate servants to give themselves to the cause." The onyx on his staff flickered. "The house of Vargenbruch will not be drawn by common snares. Lothar keeps to his estate, walks the bounds of his land, hunts alone, and seldom goes farther than the neighboring villages. Men who desire neither rank nor wealth are troublesome prey." The woman advanced one measured pace. "Every man wants something." Drathic's eyes did not leave her. "Not every longing can be seen." She smiled then, and it was a fair smile, though fair things also may be fashioned as knives. "It need only be felt." Drathic had watched the Vargenbruch heir through memories taken from the dead. He knew of a lord by lineage who lived as a forester, wearing a weathered cloak, tending an old house, and sharing his solitude with a wolf raised from a pup. Yet somewhere upon that land rested the last essence of his bloodline, a fragment borne down from an elder age when deities walked beneath the stars. With such an inheritance, a worthy descendant might pass beyond the bounds of mortal life. Without it, Lothar was simply a man. But the name Vargenbruch was not merely a name to Drathic. It was an old scar, a debt unpaid, and a curse that had outlived the dead, though Lothar himself did not yet know how deeply that stain had sunk into his bloodline. Hatred did not need closeness when it had been fed for years by memory. There was necessity, yes, but beneath necessity burned a colder thing. "The essence must remain whole," Drathic said. "If he carries it upon his person, bring him alive. If it is hidden, discover where." The woman's smile deepened. "You do not trust me to retrieve it?" Drathic laid one pale hand upon the staff. "I trust you to desire it. Desire is the root from which treachery grows." A soft laugh escaped her. For one instant Drathic heard within it the music of his mother's harp beneath the hearth. Summer came back to him, unbidden. Tall grass by the river, a dark-haired girl running ahead of him, and their mother calling them home before the storm. He crushed the memory before it could take shape. "The wolf will be troublesome," he said. "A loyal beast may see more clearly than a lonely man." The woman answered, "The beast can be handled. Patience will be needed." Drathic watched her a moment longer, as if weighing not her words but the hunger that stood behind them. "What offerings does your design require?" "5 at first," she said. "Young enough to endure the road, capable enough to pass unnoticed, and desperate enough to obey. I have also hired local brutes for coin, crude men, thick of skull, and useful only because no one remembers the faces of such creatures. They will keep the true hand hidden. We shall force Lothar's choice through his better nature." Drathic tilted his head. "You mean to snare him with a helpless soul. Will you play that part yourself, witch?" She did not flinch, though her hands tightened beneath her cloak. "No, but a helpless soul may be made. It promised something bright enough." He rose. As he descended the steps, the flames in every brazier bent toward him, though the air was still. He stopped before the woman and drew back her hood. Dark hair fell around her face, scarcely changed since the death of their birthplace. Lovely still, though hers was the beauty of a bloom fed by buried bones. "You dream of an hour still," she said. "Your home is dead." Drathic looked past her to the nameless king standing between the pillars. In the greenish gloom their stone faces seemed to watch. So had the dead watched him since childhood. So had memory. That crueler ghost followed wherever he went. "My home is dead," he said, "but it did not die for nothing." He lifted his hand beside her head. Her body stiffened at once, as if iron cords had bound every limb. He leaned close, and his voice sank until it was almost tender. "Do as I command, witch. Bring me what I desire, or you shall join the others who whisper in the dark behind my eyes." A nightmare passed through her gaze, her mouth opened, and the scream that came from her was not wholly her own. It sounded as though many throats cried through one. Drathik released her and turned away, laughing softly as she fell to her knees and gathered the fragments of courage she had believed unbreakable. Thunder rolled beyond the mountain. The pallid growths threaded through the masonry trembled. A hidden door opened in the eastern wall. 2 soldiers entered in blackened armor, their eyes dull as dead coals. Between them walked 3 captives bound at the wrists. The first was a thin young man with bruises dark upon his jaw. The second was a woman whose hair had been shorn close to the scalp. The last was a boy scarcely old enough to hold a spear. Upon each forehead, a crown had been drawn in ash and soot. 1 black line for the base, and 3 rising strokes above it, left, right, and center, like the broken points of a crude coronet. Drathik descended to them. The boy tried to stand straight, but his knees shook. "Are you afraid?" Drathik asked. The boy nodded, and a whimper escaped him as he leaned toward the woman beside him as if she could shield him. "There is no fear," Drathik said, "for those who serve beneath their future god." He closed his eyes and struck the floor once with his staff. Far above the center of the hall, between the vast pillars, a chained black crystal awakened. It had hung there unseen in the smoke, a thing like a heart cut from night. Now light moved within it, not bright, but darkly radiant. Swirling, the ink poured into deep water. The chains groaned, the pillars answered, the roots in the mouths of the stone king shivered. Then something came down. It was not rope, nor smoke, nor shadow alone. Black tendrils slid from the crystal, slow and searching, each one glistening as if wet. They moved with blind hunger, tasting the air. The captives began to struggle. The soldiers held them fast. 1 tendril found the young man's brow and clung there. Another fastened the woman's throat. A third curled around the boy's face with a lover's gentleness. Their screams ended together. Their eyes went white. For one dreadful moment they stood upright, mouths open, bodies trembling as though something within them were being drawn upward through bone and vein. Then the sound began. It was not a cry, but a thin pouring noise, like water draining through cracks beneath the earth. The crystal darkened, swollen with what it drank. The 3 captives dropped to the floor like sacks of wet grain, and the woman in gray stepped backward. Her composure had fled. She drew her hood over her face with shaking hands and turned toward the passageway, careful not to look at the bodies. Behind her, Drathik did not speak aloud, yet his words filled her skull, harsh and vast, as if carved into the inner walls of her mind by a blade of ice. "Do not fail me. Fail, and every soul you have ever known shall join me in the blackest dark, and where they shall learn to sing my name forever." She fled then, and the hall swallowed the sound of her steps. Drathik remained alone among the pillars, beneath the chained crystal and the stone kings whose names had been erased. The bodies at his feet twitched once, their mouths open, and from them came a whisper, small as a child beneath the floor. "An hour." The onyx stone upon his staff breathed a sudden heat into his palm, though no light stirred within it. Drathik looked at the darkened pillars, then to the bodies at his feet, and for a moment the mountain seemed to hold its breath. Far away, a few fragile notes trembled through the silence, fainting as an echo cast back from some unseen peak. His mother's harp, calling from a place no living hand could reach.
Boy, that escalated quickly.
So we expounded on detail and some dialogue and some things about our characters. Remember, this is not a final draft, edited manuscript, or anything like that. This is massaging and adding to the framework, nothing more. And this is going to end part 4. As we move into part 5, we can start getting the world building in place so we can get the actual narrative going. And now I'm going to leave you with this quote from Albert Einstein. "Anyone who has never made a mistake has never tried anything new." See you next week as we expand the world. Thanks for watching.